Hey, I'm Mike Lucchine. Welcome back. This is your camp report for Thursday, August 7th. And we don't have a lot of news today, but we have some really significant news. So, Rashawn Slater, right, the big left tackle from the Los Angeles Chargers, he went down today with a knee injury. Reports say that he was really frustrated. It seems like it's going to be a major injury and potentially season ending. This is a really big story. Um, there's this perception, I think, if you don't have the time to keep up with offensive lines around the league, that the Chargers have an elite offensive line. And that's just not the case. So the reason people believe that is because Slater's there. He was a big draft pick. I mean, he's been fantastic. He's uh, you know, I have Brandon Thorne's work up on the screen. You could see here. He's got him actually listed in his um, elite tier of left tackles, right? So he's only got 3 tackles there. He's there with Tristan Wirfs and of course Trent Williams, who just doesn't seem to age. But Rashawn Slater has really been a great left tackle for the Chargers, and then they drafted Joe Alt last year. All right, so I think people are sort of looking at this Chargers offensive line and thinking it's great because their tackles are great. The interior of their offensive line has not been good, though. Zion Johnson was a day 2 pick. I thought he'd be better than he's been. He struggled at left guard. He's going to be back at left guard to start this year. Hey, Bradley Bozeman, he was the center last year. He struggled. It looked for a little while like, hey, let's bring Andre James in from the Raiders and see if he makes a difference. Bozeman's, by all accounts, beating him out right now. They thought maybe Zion Johnson could move over to center and, maybe he'd play better there. That seems like they've scrapped that idea at this point. So the left guard and the center are the same as they were last year, and they were bad last year. Now, the right guard is Mekhi Becton, but we don't really truly know what we're getting there, right? So Mekhi Becton was a bust. He was a tackle with the Jets. We all know that. He was a high draft pick. And he goes over to the Eagles and all of a sudden is fantastic when moved inside to right guard. Well, we don't know for sure that that's going to carry over to his time with the Chargers. And he hasn't practiced in almost 2 weeks now. So he's clearly battling some kind of minor injury. So you have a little bit of uncertainty with Becton. You certainly can't call him a safe bet to repeat what he did last year. You've got the center and the left guard are the same as last year when they were not good. And now you had your elite pair of tackles, and there's a possibility here that Slater's going to be out maybe for the whole season. I'm speculating. Alt moves over to left tackle, and now you've got Trey Pipkins all of a sudden back at right tackle, and that's not ideal. So Amari and Hampton in the 3rd round got a lot scarier today. You've already got a Greg Roman offense where, yeah, okay, they're going to run the ball a lot. Hampton's going to get a lot of those carries, especially with Najee out. But they don't funnel a lot of their targets to the running back position. So Hampton is not going to catch a lot of passes. He's going to get a lot of carries, but that offensive line now is very questionable. So this is major news. Hampton is probably still a 3rd round pick in redraft leagues just because, once you get to the 4th round, you're looking at Kamara, and I truly believe Travion Henderson is going to be up in the 4th round pretty shortly. But aside from that, you could take a shot on Chuba Hubbard. Running back thins out. So Hampton's probably still in that 3rd round, but he's a lot scarier today than he was yesterday in that range. So that's the major camp news for today. And by the way, I shouted out Brandon Thorne before. I'm referencing his work. If you're interested in offensive lines and the quality of them, there's no one better. All right, there's no one better. I'll tell you that over at NFL Rough Draft, when I submit my top 100 board with Ray, um, there are very few people who we talk to about our rankings because we've been doing this for so long. We've had success with our accuracy with the huddle report. We trust what we're seeing. We trust what we know. There was an offensive tackle this year that I was considering in our top 100 that we were submitting for scoring, and I reached out to Brandon about his thoughts on it because I just there's no one who I respect more especially out in that fantasy football community when it comes to offensive line. So if you don't know who he is, this is his piece that he comes out with every year where he ranks the offensive linemen in the league. This is amazing work right here. And certainly, look, if you're on social media, you want to be following him. It's sure it's maybe a niche, right? Like looking at offensive lines and offensive linemen, but this is really important because that plays a big factor into the success of a lot of these running backs and quarterbacks and even receivers. So on Twitter, he's at Brandon Thorne NFL. Hey, that's at Brandon Thorne NFL. If you don't know who he is, if you're not following him yet, I strongly recommend you go do that and check out his trench warfare piece that he has here, and he comes out with this every year. It's terrific. Okay, other minor camp news for today. The 49ers, everybody's banged up there. I mentioned the other day that Isaac Guerendo is going to miss a few weeks, which shouldn't impact him too much, but I said it was going to open the door for Jordan James, who'd gotten off to a strong start in camp, and then he was sidelined for about a week. Well, James came back. I thought, hey, we're going to see him in the preseason. The door is just slightly cracked open for him to show that he could be the primary handcuff there. Well, that looks like it's not going to happen. He's got a broken finger. He's going to miss a couple of weeks. Again, it's not a major deal, but in terms of the depth chart there, he's probably not going to have much of a chance of passing Guerendo, assuming both of those players are back for week one. Jaden Blue, he was injured. I think everybody overreacts when a cart is involved at any point, but it seemed like it was a real precaution. Doesn't seem like it's a significant injury at all, but that's the change of pace back for the Cowboys. And I want to stress change of pace back. You've heard me talk about this a few times already, but Jaden Blue's not in competition with Javonte Williams and Miles Sanders. And if you like Phil Maffa, I like Phil Maffa too. I don't think he's got much of a chance to be the starter week one, but he's someone to keep an eye on. But Jaden Blue almost like he almost doesn't even play the same position as those three, right? He's more of sort of like a Nyheim Hines or like a change of pace back. This isn't someone who's going to be getting 20 carries a game, not that many running backs do anymore. But I wouldn't expect to see him in that 16 to 17 carry a game role either. If he's going to have fantasy success, it's going to be from catching the ball and having a few explosive plays each week. And he's got a chance to do that because he is a much more explosive player than the other, bigger sort of running backs that they have there. All right, Jordan Watkins is, I think, the only healthy player in 49ers camp aside from Christian McCaffrey. And it sounds like he's been coming along lately. Now, there's not a lot of target competition there right now in that camp because Jacob Cowan, who the fourth round pick from 2024 out of Arizona, he got off to a strong start and then he got hurt. I think he's got a minor hamstring injury. And the bottom half of that roster has just been turned over. It looks like, for those of you who play on My Fantasy League, it looks like a My Fantasy League trade bait from the year 2020. Okay, they're cycling through Andy Isabella and Marquez Callaway, and it's not pretty there. Anyway, Watkins has looked good. Now, the interesting thing about Watkins is he's one of the players that kind of soured me a little bit on Trey Harris, the Chargers rookie second round pick, um, back during draft season. You might wonder, well, what in the world does one have to do with the other? Well, they're teammates at Ole Miss, and you know Lane Kiffin's so good at scheming guys open, and I'm certainly not the first person to say, I'm not the last person to say that, who's going to say that. But after Trey Harris got hurt, remember he was having all those really big games. He wasn't really looked at as being an NFL, a day two NFL prospect coming into last season. And as soon as he got hurt, Jordan Watkins kind of picked right up where he left off. And he started having big games. So someone to keep an eye on in 49ers camp if he continues to play well. Two other real quick tidbits. One, Sean McVay says that if Matthew Stafford were, in the middle of a season right now, he would be playing in the game. So that's encouraging. I still feel like it's probably not great that he needs to take an epidural to go about his everyday business. Hey, you heard me talking about that on Walt's show last night. I mentioned it in yesterday's camp update as well. Um, it it makes it for me, if I'm looking at that beginning tier of receivers, not beginning tier of receivers, because the beginning tier is Jamar Chase, CeeDee Lamb, and Jefferson and Neighbors. But if I'm looking at that tier after that, that end of the first round to middle of the second round tier, there wasn't much separating them to begin with. And now I'm saying, well, Puka Nacua is not a guy who's going to create a lot of separation. He, he's really good, but part of the reason he's really good is because Matthew Stafford is really accurate and he's able to throw him open quite a bit. I've got him down into the second round now, whereas before I had him, I think I had him 11th. Now I've got him behind AJ Brown. So if you're drafting today, I would consider him in the beginning portion of the second round, maybe like the second, third, fourth, fifth pick of the second round, rather than the 10th, 11th pick of the first round. And Devontae Adams, he's got to worry. You've heard me talk about this as well. He's got to worry about not only staying productive. He's going to be 33 before the end of the year. There aren't a lot of age 32 quality seasons from wide receivers in the last 10 years. But he also has to worry about Stafford and his health and him staying put together through season's end. So just a little tidbit, though, it's a little bit encouraging with what Sean McVay was saying about Matthew Stafford. Last thing, the preseason kicks off for real tonight, right? The Hall of Fame game doesn't really count. Keep an eye on Keaton Mitchell for the Baltimore Ravens. Yeah, here's a guy who looked like he was ready to break out, and he tore his ACL. He came back last year in the middle of the season, and I ran to my waiver wires, picked him up, had him stashed in a bunch of dynasty leagues, and he just didn't look like the same player. Well, the early reports are that he looks a lot faster in camp this year, but we get to see him in game action today. So keep an eye on what he looks like, and also keep an eye on whether or not Justice Hill plays. Okay, now if Justice Hill doesn't play, it doesn't necessarily mean that Keaton Mitchell is behind Hill in the running back depth chart, but because it could also mean that they just want to get Keaton Mitchell into some game action since he missed so much time. But if Hill comes in and plays after Keaton Mitchell, if he plays tonight but after Keaton Mitchell is out of the game, then I think that would be pretty telling that Mitchell's back and he'll need to be bumped up closer to that range where we have the high upside handcuff running backs. So we'll talk more about that tomorrow, but I've already talked for too long. That's my camp update for today. Again, that strategy series is going to be starting soon. And go check out Brandon Thorne. The guy is a genius when it comes to offensive linemen. All right, enjoy preseason.